Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on thriving in the virtual classroom. We're so glad to have you join us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rachel Schrader. I am the Senior Vice President of Clinical Care at Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy. And we've really enjoyed the opportunity over the last several weeks to really craft some hopefully helpful content for all of our Duchenne community surrounding the return to school, whether it be in person or virtual. So if you're interested, please feel free to go back. Last week we had a Wednesday webinar and a Family Friday Facebook Live on returning to school in person and how to make the best of that choice. And today we're really going to dive into thriving in the virtual classroom setting. We recognize that what back to school looks like for each family might be a little bit different, and what the right decision is for each family is a little bit different. And so we want to be sure to just provide hopefully some helpful insight into, helping families be as successful as possible. So we're really excited to dive into this conversation. One thing that we do want to share is that we recently pushed out our updated Education Matters guides for parents and teachers to coincide with the start of the school year. We didn't necessarily anticipate that it would have to coincide with potential virtual learning as well, but we think that these are really great tools to have to really start the conversation with your child's school and guide that conversation for different learning implications, different things to keep in consideration to help our boys be as successful as possible. We have 3 separate volumes of Education Matters, and they're divided by age and educational level so that you can pick whatever level is most appropriate for your family. So go ahead and head on over to our website, maybe after the webinar today, and check it out. So I'm really excited to have some wonderful panelists with us today. We have Molly Colvin, who is a neuropsychologist at Mass General. We have Alex Grossman, who's an occupational therapist, and Deb Guntram, who is the nurse practitioner at the University of Rochester. And they each have really great perspective on returning to school in a virtual environment. And I think that they're all going to be able to bring, some different insight and tips and tricks for being successful. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and just dive right in. Molly Colvin, again, like I said, she's a neuropsychologist, and she is going to dive into some of the psychological, psychosocial implications of back to virtual school. So Molly, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to speak this afternoon. It's great to be here with all of you. For parents, this is a really challenging time, and it's even more challenging for parents of children who have Duchenne or Becker muscular dystrophy. I actually don't see the controls now, Rachel, sorry.
So make sure that you're kind of hovering over the slide, and then it should show up. If it doesn't, I'll go ahead and do that first slide for you.
Cool. So in years past, many of us look forward to the return to school in the fall. We think of new beginnings and the promise of our children learning new information in a supportive school environment. But this year, because of the COVID pandemic, many of us are now preparing for virtual learning at home. Until this past spring, this may not have sounded so bad. Like this picture, I think many of us envisioned casually checking on our children while they were peacefully engaged in online learning. But many of us also learned from the spring that online learning is much more likely to leave our families looking a lot more like this. So it's understandable that we want to be prepared this fall, especially knowing that our current situation may not change anytime soon. So where do we begin? First, with communication and communicating with schools. It's important to remember that it's the school's job to drive the educational programming. Parents are really ideally facilitators in this plan and not teachers. But for that to work, it takes clear communication between families and schools. And I imagine that many of you are currently getting information from your school and hopefully also speaking with them about what to expect. And these are some things that you should be asking your school right now or hoping to get more communication about. Some major things actually relate to what the schedule will look like so that you can actually make plans for your family. But also the difference between synchronous learning and asynchronous learning. For some learners, and especially for younger children, synchronous learning is important. That's where a teacher is actually face-to-face with your child. And asynchronous learning can be difficult for kids who may have learning challenges or who aren't sort of older and self-directed in their learning. But some of the other challenges that many families faced in the spring were really about knowing what computers or internet access or other materials they may need, also having access to online portals. I think many schools were set up so that children would have individual access to the portals, but parents didn't have access, and that was challenging. And so I think it's worth talking to schools about how you might be able to follow along with your child as they go along. But also around the timing of how much time they should be spending every day in the learning environment. And for children who are getting special education services and accommodations, I think this is a really critical time to speak about how those services are going to be delivered during the upcoming school year. Here in Massachusetts, there's been increasing conversation about children who need services being prioritized for in-person learning if it is safe to do so, recognizing that there are individual health considerations, especially for our boys, that are important to think about. So if those services do need to be delivered in virtually, it's important to talk about how they're going to be delivered and whether it's in compliance with the IEP or 504 plan that's in place. I also think communicating within your family right now is really important. And one of the things that I've been talking about with families is about creating a COVID contract that is really driven by some core values. And these are some that you may think are important for your family, but there may be others. I think for families with children who have health needs, it's really important that maintaining and promoting physical and emotional health be at the top priority for everybody in the family, and that there be open conversations within your family and your extended family about the safeguards and the comfort level that you have with regard to protection from COVID exposure. And the goal here is to recognize that the unit is stronger than the individual, and that you want to support each other through difficult times. Now that you've sort of got the basics in place, it's really to think about some of the mechanics. And so the first one is really to think about a daily routine. And this is going to be important so that you can really promote and model positive health behaviors. It's annoying when you're at home all the time to sort of do 3 meals a day and to follow a regular sleep schedule, but it's really important because it also sort of helps you stay in optimal mental and physical and emotional health. So building in some time every day for fresh air and physical activity and checking in about your emotions are all things that are really important to do on a daily basis, as well as being clear about who's on duty during online school and how chores are getting done. It's really also important to define separate spaces for different activities because that's going to cue your body and mind to shift gears and to get ready to engage in a task. If you're on your bed, you should be sleeping. And if you're not, if you're at your desk, you should be working. And just like in a regular school year, it will be important to have organizational tools like calendars and folders. And it may be helpful to restrict access to games and web browsers on the computer that's dedicated to schoolwork. Just as in a regular classroom, there should be behavioral expectations for virtual school. Your teacher is likely to define these, but you should help your child also meet these and reinforce them by making sure that they're there on time, that they turn on the camera, that they limit the social chatting and texting during lectures, and that they're prepared every day. If there's an advantage to virtual school, it may be that there are more opportunities to leverage technology that matches your child's learning needs. But it's also important to teach your child how to use the internet to find good information and tools. But some of the things that may be especially helpful for many of the boys in our community are things like speech to text and text to speech, and being able to leverage those more readily than even is possible sometimes in the normal classroom. One of the biggest fears that I hear from parents is that virtual school will result in their kids being online all the time. And we've been hearing since they were born about how bad that might be for their development. But not all screen time is the same. This picture shows how you might conceptualize a screen time diet. So things like gaming would be viewed like ice cream, while things like virtual school is like eating your vegetables. And so if you think about there being almost like a diet, a digital media food pyramid, you can imagine that it's okay for your child to be spending more time doing online learning, but you still need to do things like monitor isolated gaming or individual gaming, but it's better if they're gaming with friends, or they're using that to interact with their peers. Similarly, it's important to establish some screen-free family times and rules to promote digital health. This is especially important to promote safety on the internet, so conversations around social media use are really important, but also positive health behaviors like sleep. So for many families, this means taking the devices out of the bedroom at bedtime, or even turning off the Wi-Fi. For some internet providers, there are apps that you can put on your phone that might actually sort of interrupt Wi-Fi access so that you can actually ensure that kids aren't online and that they're spending some time every day screen-free. As the pandemic has gone on, I think we've all learned that it's hard to know what's coming next and that we should really anticipate some speed bumps. So with virtual learning, I think one of the biggest fears for families is about how you keep your child engaged for multiple hours a day while they're not actually in a physical classroom. So some things that may be really helpful are to use timers and clocks to delineate how much time they're doing on an individual task, to recognize when your child is frustrated and change gears or take breaks when that happens. It may be good to find a child or two from your child's classroom who they can sort of be engaged in while they're doing homework, almost like a mini virtual learning prod, and to use checklists to sort of keep track of the work that needs to be done. Some families are finding that they want to do this at the beginning and the end of the day, and maybe a couple times in the middle to keep your child on track. The other thing that I think is on everybody's mind is how you promote healthy peer socialization when your child is actually at home all the time. And this is where I think the digital media diet is important to keep in mind and to recognize that things like playing video games with a group are better than playing it by themselves. But there may also be opportunities here to find extracurricular activities or ask the teacher or school to facilitate small group interactions, and then also access the resources through the PPMD community. We know that those with Duchenne and Becker may be at greater risk of learning difficulties, and we've historically relied on teachers to let us know when this is a concern. So some parents may be worried about whether they will recognize learning challenges in their child. These are some common indicators that your child might be having a learning difficulty that needs to be further assessed. And if you see some of these signs, then it's worth talking to your child's teacher or school personnel to determine how to address them and whether formal assessment for a learning disability might be warranted. Similarly, it's really important right now to monitor and recognize for signs of stress, anxiety, and depression, recognizing that they may come in different forms. So some people actually experience emotional stress in their bodies, with some common symptoms being things like sweating or chest tightness or feeling tight in your shoulders, and having a racing heart or shallow breathing, trouble sleeping, changes in your appetite, can all be physiological symptoms of stress. The cognitive symptoms of stress and anxiety are actually less commonly discussed, but they're really important to recognize, and they can look like things like forgetfulness or difficulty concentrating, or thinking that you sort of have a little bit of a brain fog that you can't quite focus as clearly as you used to. So managing virtual school this year while also managing your home or work responsibilities is likely to feel a lot like juggling while running a marathon. And so it's important to have some self-care and coping strategies to help you through it. Put on your own oxygen mask first. By practicing daily self-care, thinking about exercise or listening to music or doing a game or a puzzle that you enjoy, making sure that you sort of spend time reading a book or that you just sort of even sometimes take a shower and brush your hair, can all be things that sort of cue your body that you're taking care of yourself and that you're finding time for some relaxation. Another really important one is to stay in the present. Remember, the best way to go through a marathon is 1 mile at a time. So take it one day at a time and focus on slowing down your active mind and paying attention to your environment and checking in with your body. Brene Brown, one of the self-help gurus, talks about gremlins and getting rid of gremlins that are really negative thoughts that we tell ourselves. And so I think in this day and age, it's important to do things like expect that you're going to have bad days and forgive yourself for being less than perfect or for not pulling it all together neatly and tidily every day. Focus on what you are doing rather than what you're not doing. And then also ask for help if you need it. A big one right now for managing stress and anxiety is also to identify what you can control and then let go of what you can't. You can't control how long COVID is going to last. You can't control whether there are going to be adequate hospital resources or what the government's going to do or how the election's going to turn out. None of those things are things that we can control. But we can control how much news is being discussed in our house what our daily schedule are, how we're responding to our children, how we're planning for our children's medical needs, and what precautions we're taking to manage exposure to COVID. It's important to make time for yourself to have social support and identify people in your sphere who can help you and who might just have a conversation with you so you feel like you can vent or get a little bit of time for yourself. And many of these same things can be applied to taking care of the family. As we talked about earlier, it's really important that your family as a whole practice a regular schedule with sleep and exercise and meals, and that you're helping your children during this stressful time by also remembering to talk to them about what they are hearing from the community, about what their fears are, about whether they're going to be exposed or the safety of their family or how their online learning is going or whether they have enough time with their peers. And you can do that by limiting your news exposure, stopping and asking questions to learn what they know rather than telling them. Ask them what they have heard or what they've learned, using language that they can understand and reassuring them that you're going to take care of them. Helping your family comes right back to the COVID contract that we talked about at the beginning, which is about making sure you're planning fun family activities and choosing to respond with love and kindness and putting your family's physical and mental health as the top priority. And finally, we're on a challenging journey, and it's really important to maintain hope as we travel together down this road. I'd be happy to address any questions towards the end or to review any of the specifics that were on the slide, but I want to turn it over now to Alex Grossman.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Molly. So my presentation is actually going to go hand in hand with Molly's. We kind of talk about a lot of the same things, but just kind of from a different perspective. So like Molly said, my name is Alex Grossman. I am a pediatric occupational therapist. A lot of my kids' diagnoses range from being on the autism spectrum to cerebral palsy, spina bifida, and some other rare diagnoses as well. So that is a picture of me on the left, just so that way you have a face to the name. And then the picture on the right is of my family. And the reason I put that up there is because I have two very beautiful nephews. And the little boy that's on the right, his name is Jack, and he is 10 years old. But he was diagnosed with DMD when he was 18 months old. So this is a very special presentation for me, and it's a pleasure being able to speak with all of you because we all are part of this PPMD and Duchenne family. So I also included my email in here just in case you guys want to reach out to me at any point in time. I'm definitely here for you guys with anything that you need. Okay. Ooh, it cut off a little bit. But so to talk about the IEP in the virtual world. So one thing that I really would like to emphasize is get to know the platform that you and your child will be using for school. Each teacher is kind of going to be using a different platform, so make sure that you're comfortable with that before the time comes. You can always reach out to the teacher and just ask those questions. Another great thing to remember is to build relationships with the staff that's working with your child, whether that's the PT, the OT, the speech therapist, their teacher, as well as the principal, because they are there for you and they are there for your child. So when you reach out, include a picture of your kiddo just so that way they know who you're talking about, and then it makes it a little bit more special when they do get to see your child again after this COVID period is over. So talking about how we're going to implement an IEP in the virtual world at home. So it's going to vary drastically depending on each school and the school district. So I am in the Austin, Texas area, and talking to all the different schools here and a lot of the therapists that I know, it ranges even just between schools. So just to kind of start, there is more than likely going to be a master schedule. And what this schedule is, it's a brief guideline for each grade that they send out to the teachers, and then the teachers get to kind of customize that as their learning style and teaching style best suits for each child. And so make sure that you reach out to the teacher and get that schedule so that way we can create a schedule for your kids for the day. And then kind of like Molly was saying, the therapy could happen through synchronous learning or asynchronous. And so synchronous is really having the Zoom calls with the therapist. And then the asynchronous is really when they're just going to kind of send a lesson plan out and have you guys do the therapy at home. Maybe it's through another online portal. It could also be through indirect therapy, which is going to be when they kind of consult with the teacher or the parents just to kind of help with the strategies in the classroom or your school classroom, your home classroom, I'm sorry. And then it could also be in groups. So the groups, I'm not so sure how big those groups are going to be, but I do know that's something that's up in the air. And I think would also kind of be great because these kids are so socially isolated right now. Another way, there's two more. So the next one is to be in a jump in, which basically means that your child will be in their main Zoom call with their teachers, with their whole class, and then the therapist will come in and kind of grab your child, break them out in a separate Zoom call, and then have their therapy one-on-one like that. And lastly, this is a very rare occasion, and I've only had one therapist say that their school is doing this, and it is, again, very rare. But if your child is homebound and they have a doctor's note, there are some therapists that are traveling to the house of the child, so that way they can see them in person there. If your child uses any assistive devices or computers, assistive technology, make sure that you reach out to the therapist that is using those assistive technologies with them, so that way they can either get you those assistive techs or get you in contact with somebody, so that way you can have them at home as well. So one way that parents can really help implement the IEP at home is, once again, reach out to these therapists because they are there for you and figure out how they have their hands on your child so that way you can kind of implement those same strategies with them at home. Obviously, for the Duchenne kiddos, stretching is very important, so I would definitely implement some stretch breaks. If they want to play their Switch for a couple minutes, go ahead and stretch them while they're doing that. It's a nice little getaway for them. A lot of teachers also have, or therapists already have ideas for accommodations in the home environment. So once again, reach out. They have stuff in their pocket for you to just kind of pull out at home. Okay. So to talk about how we're going to create the most optimal school zone for kids at home. So you really want to have a clean and quiet environment, clear of distractions. I know that this is going to be hard for some families. Maybe you don't have the space, or maybe you have other kiddos that are around, but just trying to make sure that we get as close to the school environment as we possibly can. And because your kids are going to be sitting for extended periods of time, we want to make sure that we're focusing on positioning and posture. So the way that I like to kind of describe this is 90-90-90. And what that means is that your hips, your knees, and your ankles are all at 90 degrees. So that way we have the most proper and straight spinal alignment. And if your child is not going to be using their keyboard, go ahead and raise that computer up more towards eye level. So that way we can make sure that the back of the neck and the spine back there, the ligaments stay nice and strong. And the same for the feet. If your child's feet are dangling because the chair is too big, go ahead and put some books or a stool underneath there and get those feet up so the chair fits. Another question I've been getting a lot is, how do we take breaks in this virtual world? So that's going to depend greatly on the teacher, and that's also going to depend greatly on your child. So you know them best. You know what sucks them in and it's hard to pull them away from. You know what they're able to transition away from very easily. So use that knowledge to your advantage. So this is a picture of both my nephews once again, and Jack just got this electric bike for his birthday. And I know that my sister really likes to use this electric bike for a lot of his breaks because it gets him outside. It's a nice change of scenery and just, get some sunlight, some vitamin D and that kind of thing. Okay. And then behavior and sensory. So this is why I became an OT. I absolutely love behavior and sensory. This is like my world. So just like when you go anywhere, whether that's a restaurant or that is an airport, an airplane, church, school, wherever, there are rules. So whether they're hidden rules or they are rules that are posted on the wall, we need to have rules for our children at home in the school environment. So make sure that your kids know what the rules are, they know what's going to happen if they break them, and you talk about them beforehand just so that way they can really get a good grasp of what it's going to be like for you to kind of be their mediator between you and the teacher. Another thing I like to use are visual schedules and written schedules. So depending on your child, the age of your child, the cognitive level of your child, maybe your kid wants to write out his schedule for the day, or maybe they get a little overwhelmed if there's too much on the list. So you might want to use picture cards or maybe even just like a first send type of schedule. Another thing that's great is to use timers because kids think that when they are working and you say it's time for math, that they are going to be working on math for an eternity. So if they're going to be doing math for 20, 30 minutes, set that timer. I personally like to use, it's called a time timer. And they just kind of get to watch that time run out so that way they know what's coming next and that it's not going to last forever. One other great thing to implement are token charts. And with a token chart, it kind of goes along with the rules. If they do their math for 20 minutes, they earn a token, they follow the rules, that's great. And they get to pick their reward at the beginning of the day, whether that's ice cream after dinner or that is getting to play the Nintendo Switch before bed, whatever it might be. But this really puts them and gives them a lot of independence. It puts them in control of their own destiny. So if they choose to not follow these rules and they choose to not abide by the timer, then they're really choosing for themselves to not have ice cream, or they're choosing for themselves to not play. And then another thing I like to do is give a kid a fidget. It can be a hand fidget or a feet, leg fidget. The picture on the right is a bunch of fidgets that I actually use all the time. I love them because they are quiet and they just kind of keep their hand busy while the teacher is talking or while you're talking, so that way, they're not having to look at what they're doing, but it just kind of keeps them busy. So a couple really good websites that I like to use. It's called funandfunction.com, and it goes over a lot of different sensory needs and adaptation tools. So you can search by diagnosis, you can search by whatever behavior your child has, maybe that's biting or chewing, whatever the case may be. My only recommendation is once you find the tool that you want to use from the website, go to Amazon because you can find it for a lot cheaper than what they're asking on the website. The last website I like to use is teacherspayteachers.com. All of the tools on this website are quite cheap, but this is where you can find the visual schedules and the picture cards, maybe some emotional regulation techniques if we're having a lot of meltdowns or tantrums. Okay. And then how are we going to be social during this time of isolation? This is such a big question for a lot of parents, and honestly, it's hard for adults too. So let's kind of go into that a little bit. So some kids really like art, and if your child's really into art, some online art classes are a fantastic idea because they get to socialize with kids and also kind of create something of their own in the time being. So there are different levels of art classes. There's some advanced and there's some for little kids, but they are really great, and the teachers are always super awesome in these courses. Hiring a babysitter. This is a great idea. So what I do with this is I don't necessarily have the babysitters come into the house, but, having somebody talk to your child, maybe it's through Zoom or FaceTime, or just having somebody that your child knows and doesn't get to see very often, talking to them for about an hour, maybe they play hide and seek or have a scavenger hunt or something like that. But conversations really go a long way, and especially if it's somebody that they don't see very often. One other thing you can do is story time. So if you have little ones, maybe it's grandma or grandpa, or maybe an aunt or uncle that don't get to see your child very often, but maybe they read them a story. Or for some of the older kiddos, you guys can have your kid and another child, if they're reading the same book, maybe they can take turns through Zoom reading back and forth to one another so that way they can kind of finish a series and kind of bond that way as well. And then for some more virtual options, there's virtual board games that are really fun. A lot of my kids really like to do that. And Roblox is a new app that a lot of kids have been really interested in. It's a very clean app. I think you kind of get to create games and you get to play with kids like friends and peers. And then for the older kiddos, there's a house party app. This is games like Pictionary and Heads Up, but you do play with your friends on this app, and I do recommend it for more of a mature kiddo, so 14 and up. And before you do any of these things, if your child does have trouble with social skills, maybe they just really can't stand to lose, I like to read some social stories, and the social story book that I have is actually called The Social Story Book. And you can get it on Amazon, but I read this to a wide variety of my kiddos in the clinic, and it really seems to help. I have a lot of parents constantly asking for more social stories because they do make an impact. If your child really has a hard time with social skills, ask your therapist, a speech therapist, the occupational therapist, to implement the Superflex curriculum. I would not recommend you guys buying the socialthinking.com Superflex curriculum only because it is very expensive, but it is a very good thing for kids to use because it gives them a very concrete example for, why our brain does certain things. So that's really all I have for you guys. And again, I included my email on this so you guys can reach out to me at any point in time. But that's all I have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alex. I think that there were just so many tangible tips and tricks and recommendations that you had in your presentation that I think I'll use in my own life. So that was just wonderful. Thank you so much. And we've got some great questions coming in that we can certainly dive into after we finish with the presentations. A quick reminder to everyone, there is that chat box in the lower left-hand portion of your screen. If you have questions, go ahead and type those in and submit them, and then we'll get to them in the Q&A section of today's webinar. So next up we have Deb Guntram. She is the nurse practitioner in the Neuromuscular Disease Center at University of Rochester, and we will hear from her now. Thanks so much, Deb.
I want to thank you for inviting me to participate. I'm really excited. And you would think that the three of us had collaborated on our presentation, so you may see some overlapping. But I want to start by saying, just breathe. We're just 5 months into the COVID-19 pandemic, although it seems like it's been a lifetime. But we've only been going at this since March. And there's no right or wrong answer. You're doing what you think is best for your family and your child. We're all in this together, and we're all learning as we go. Like it has said by previous presenters, I think that if you're either by choice or because the school district has mandated that you're doing virtual learning, that it's really important to have a schedule and a routine. So you need to kind of start thinking as schools are ramping up to go to start having a bedtime schedule. Everybody relaxes during the summer. So start kind of prepping for going to bed earlier and getting up, and have a morning schedule and routine. I think it's really important that your child gets up, gets dressed, has breakfast, brushes the teeth, just like if they were going physically into school. It kind of sets the day for, it puts you in that going to school mode. And then trying as best you can, and it's going to be different for every family and every household, but trying to set up a school environment at home. If possible, trying to have a dedicated space for school that's away from other distractions. And then, like the other presenters have said, you need to schedule in time for breaks and to set expectations for the week and for the day. Some resources that I've been looking at in prepping for this, the U.S. Department of Education actually has a good website with information. They have a supplemental fact sheet addressing the risk of COVID-19 in preschool, elementary, and secondary schools while serving children with disabilities. And then your local Department of Education at the state and local level also have good information. So the key points when I was looking at the federal website, because, right, that's going to apply to everybody. It's different state to state, but the federal one applies to everybody. That federal law requires distance instruction to be accessible to students with disabilities, but what they don't do is mandate those specifics. So it's really different from state to state and different from district to district. And I think that this comes in most with providing the therapies that your child may be getting at school, whether it be physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. And it may not be feasible at this time due to safety concerns to provide hands-on therapy. And by the same token, it may not be feasible. Some services may not be able to be provided online. And local school systems may not be able to provide all the services in the manner that it's typically provided. There has to be flexibility, but the bottom line is that health and safety are the top priority. So where do you go if your child isn't able to get everything they're needing from if it's virtual therapy. Tap into your local clinic where your child receives their Duchenne care. Talk to your pediatrician's office, and then also use your school as a resource, the teachers, the administrators, the therapists. And then what we've found as we've been navigating COVID in our area is we have had home PT evaluations by a home care agency when some of our kiddos have run into situations that we aren't able to manage or troubleshoot online. And then I was chatting with our clinic PT, and one of the big things, if your child's at home, is that they're probably not moving around as much as if they were at school. And she wanted to be sure that I stressed to keep moving. So if you're ambulatory, we'll make regular time to get up and move around and get outside and take breaks. Make time for regular physical activity. And if you're not ambulatory, then make regular time for any physical activity that you're able to do. And then regular stretching and range of motion are extremely important. My presentation is very short and sweet. Again, I'm going to end with just breathe. You're doing the best you can in a completely impossible situation.
Thank you so much, Deb. I love that last piece and that repetition that we all just need to breathe, right? I think, there is no perfect answer. There's no perfect solution. Nobody wants to be in this situation, and we're all just making the best choices for our families that we can. There's no right or wrong answer. There's just what's best for each of our individual families. And so thank you so much for each of our speakers for joining us today. I know that I got some really practical insight on how to be successful going into this next school year. So at this point, we are going to go ahead and transition into our Q&A session. So like I mentioned before, that lower left-hand portion of your screen, there's a question box. So as a recap, we have a neuropsychologist, an occupational therapist, and a neuromuscular nurse practitioner on the phone. So send us your questions for them. What are you wondering about? What questions do you have? What are some things that you've run into that you'd like their perspective on? And we can go ahead and we can start that conversation. So we'll start with the first question that's come in, and I think that this is a really great question because I see a bit of it in myself too. So I think we'll start with Molly for this one. So the question reads, one thing my family of introverts has noticed is that we now don't have as much tolerance for social pressure environments like synchronous classroom activities or group chats. We usually try to get out of these if we can. Do you have any advice for people whose introversion is more pronounced or profound in this time during a pandemic? In some ways, this staying at home thing has been a huge relief from the relentless social pressures of regular life. So Molly, what do you think?
I think this is a great question, and I think it's really true that, for people who identify as introverts, what I've been hearing is this sort of experience of feeling relief because we don't have to kind of keep up with all of the activities and running around and hustle and bustle of, the schedule that was there before March. It can be it can feel a little like your family is in a cocoon and you don't want to sort of have people coming into your bubble or into your cocoon. I also think that, one of the things that has been reinforcing that is this kind of fear around exposure and how we manage exposure when we do leave our bubble or leave our house. And it's normal right now to experience some anxiety about that, which then makes it even harder for you to approach the situations that are stressful, which might mean relating to other people. And that can then generalize to include interactions that may even be sort of online. I think one of the other things that contributes to this is what I call, and it's not unique to me, I didn't make this term up, but I think it explains it, is really this idea about Zoom fatigue. And, one of the things that I've even been finding in doing a lot of clinical care over Zoom is that it's exhausting in a very different way than in-person interactions are. It requires really paying attention to very subtle social cues that are sometimes hard to pick up on camera. It also requires, making sure that you yourself are kind of responding almost in over-responding. If you sort of acted the way that you do on Zoom in regular life, people might think that you were acting, just so that you can carry your point across or carry your tone of voice. So I think it is really, for all of those reasons, very normal to sort of feel a little bit like you want to sort of stay in your family bubble, and that virtual school feels like it's an intrusion in on it. But I think the important part is to almost think of it as it is when you leave the house, but to think of it in that there are time delineated times. There are times when you need to interact with people in that sort of virtual format, and school is one of them. But it may be especially helpful for people who are having this experience to keep the computers that are dedicated for work and school, to the extent that you can, in a separate place, especially ones that are, and not in places in your house that are associated with relaxing and sleeping. Because it's likely that when you are engaging with the virtual world, it's going to feel a little bit more anxiety provoking and a little bit more sort of tension filled. And your body over time is going to learn that that's the room where you do those things. So if you're doing it in a place where you normally relax or sleep, it's going to make those activities harder. But I think to some extent what you're describing is normal and actually being reinforced as we continue to go through the months of this pandemic.
That's really helpful. And I think I really kind of connect with what you're saying about keeping the computer or whatever device you're using in a place that is intended for work or school or whatever the case may be, and not necessarily in a place in the home that's made for relaxing. I know sometimes I'll bring my laptop out into the family room and sit on the couch and maybe have a little bit of Netflix on and try to catch up with things. And that's, I think in the moment that maybe this is good, this is helping me relax, but really it's kind of blurring those lines. And then I can find myself feeling anxious in those places that are really supposed to be safe places. So then you layer on, the implications of a boy with Duchenne and the lack of dystrophin in his brain and any, special things about how he learns most successfully. And I can see how that would just really be a rabbit hole. So I think that's just so insightful, Molly.
I think you raised a really good point, too, about the shifting, and that's hard for a lot of boys with Duchenne, too, which I think is also why it's important to hold to the schedule and keep the spaces clean about sort of what you're doing in what space, because the shifting in and of itself can sometimes be challenging.
Absolutely. And I think, so that actually leads really nicely into the next question that we got, that's about those schedules. And I'm just going to go ahead and read it verbatim, and then I'll field it to our speakers. So this person writes that we're finding that a good health and happiness schedule for us is a little bit lopsided with self-care. So sleep, something like 12 hours a day, stretching, bathing, self-care, about 3 hours a day, meals, 2 or 3 hours a day. How much school time seems to be appropriate given these needs, which we're finally able to meet without stress now that we've been able to set these own schedules at home as we shift into the beginning of the school year. Maybe Molly, you can start us off and then we'll toss it to Alex from there.
Sure. I think, prioritizing self-care is really at the sort of the top of the list for me, especially knowing that this is, as I was saying before, so you're juggling while on a marathon. So I think it is important to kind of prioritize sleep and relaxation and making sure that you're having regular meals. And that school has to somewhere kind of fit in there too. But I think this is where first it's important to have that communication with the school about how much time each day should be allocated to educational activities. And that includes just the face-to-face time and the service delivery as well as the actual completion of the work. And this may depend a little bit on the age of your child and where they are in their academic career. But I think it probably is going to require to eat into some of that time as school starts up again. And then the key is really going to be about maybe easing in gradually, but also watching for signs of stress from either your child or from your family system, and then making modifications. I think the other piece is, to the extent possible that you can break up the learning, is helpful in taking breaks during the day. So many of the virtual learning schedules I'm hearing have prioritized more synchronous learning than they were in the spring, which I think is great, because I think a lot of kids were too asynchronous in the spring. But now they're sort of expected to be there on Zoom from 8:30 to 2:30, and that worries me in a different way. I think then it's really important, as some of the other speakers were saying, to build in breaks and to make sure that you're taking sort of opportunities for self-care that may not need to be an hour, but might need to be 5 or 10 minutes of mindfulness, or stepping outside to get some fresh air, or just sort of doing some stretches. So that you're taking kind of even mini breaks during the day to kind of make sure that you're not sort of chunking too much school with not enough care.
Wonderful. Alex, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, especially because Duchenne kiddos are immunocompromised, I definitely think that the self, taking care of yourself and having good health is definitely hugely important, like Molly said. So don't stop doing that, obviously, but this is when the timers are going to come in handy. Make your visual schedule or your written schedule, so that way there's nothing that's going to be thrown out at you guys to, give anxiety or give him anxiety. He knows what's coming up next, and so then that way there are no surprises. But then also have those timers so that way he knows that there's an end to the activity. And then, the token charts, maybe you guys fly through the token charts. He sits for 5 or 10 minutes and then he gets to earn those little breaks. But definitely taking breaks more frequently might be a really good idea. And that's kind of probably when you might be able to gain some of that time back with the stretching, just by in the breaks. In those short breaks, maybe stretching him while he's playing a game or playing with Legos is a really good idea as well. So just kind of some tips and tricks that I think might be helpful throughout the day as well.
That's great. And what I'm hearing is that, it seems like it's really helpful to be able to kind of modify and personalize that school schedule during the day as much as we're able. And I know that can be really hard, particularly considering the synchronous learning that we're really seeing. My question next is for Deb. Deb, are you finding that you're getting a lot of requests from families for, medical documentation from the neuromuscular team to support modified sorts of school days? What does that collaboration look like between the neuromuscular team and the academic team in the school setting?
So that's a wonderful question, and I feel like that's a big part of my day these days is fielding those questions. At the beginning of this, it was a different kind of panic back in March. And I always offset with, I do not envy any parents the decision and the place that they're put in right now, because it's just an impossible situation, because either way it feels like you're giving something up. And I think that it's individual, and you have to, look at the whole child. What medications are they on? What is their lung function? What is their cardiac function? All of those things, along with what is the school putting in place to protect the kids because at least around here, some of our special needs kids are actually in school more than some of our other populations. But at the bottom line, you have to be comfortable with what the school's putting in place. And at least around here, the schools are letting parents choose. They can do all online, or they can do a hybrid model. The other thing is you know your child the best. Are they going to be able to tolerate keeping a mask on? Are they going to be able to tolerate, and is it within their personality to be able to socially distance? I mean, we all know we have these ones that are, very much in your personal space. So those are all things that have to get factored in, and it's not a one-size-fits-all for every family.
I can't agree with that enough. It's truly just so unique and specific for every single family and their own circumstances. I think that kind of speaks to the next question, and I'm going to field this one for Alex. Alex, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about tools for managing our kids at home with different grade levels. So maybe it's, siblings, maybe it's, having multiple kids in the home, whatever that looks like. But maybe you could speak to, some of the different needs of, a kindergarten first grader versus a middle schooler versus maybe that more self-directed high schooler. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this is a very loaded question.
I know.
I know. So it's so going to depend on the household. It can even range just from how much empty space you have, how many kids you have, what the age range of your kids are. But this is where I really think, and if any of you guys have worked with Denise in any of the conferences, you'll know that she's a firm believer in this, and so am I, making a rule wall. So while your kid is in the school session with you at home, there are also rules for the siblings to either they have to be 10 feet away from the room, they have to stand behind the line, like they are not able to go over there, or, whatever kind of rules you guys want to make. And the same thing goes for that as well. Like they can build their token charts. So if your child is doing school 5 times a day, the siblings also have an opportunity to follow those rules those 5 times a day and earn their token. So that way they get their also preferred preferred activity or whatever. Like I said, maybe it's ice cream after dinner or something. But then that way they also feel like they're in control of the situation, because this time period with COVID, I think we're all feeling like we don't have a lot of control of what's going on. And so trying to make sure that all of our kids feel as independent as possible during this time, I think, is going to be very, very important. In terms of the younger age range, again, I think really from like the young age to like middle school-ish, maybe a little bit younger, the visual schedules are going to be your lifesaver, because for the whole family, it's going to really put things in a very, I guess I'm going to use the word again, it's going to put it very visually, so everybody knows what's coming next. Everybody knows what to expect. And some of these kiddos with Duchenne, they also have autism. And so making sudden changes in the schedule can really throw them off. So making sure we're really consistent with the schedules, keeping to those as much as we possibly can is going to be beneficial for everybody in the house. And then for the older kiddos, making them feel like they have more control as well. They get to write out their schedule. Teachers are generally pretty adaptable. So if your child does need more breaks, email your teacher and figure out when it would be the best time to take those extra breaks. And then that way, when you guys do make your written schedule, you guys can write those out as well and kind of plan how frequently you want to take those breaks throughout the day. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I think, again, like I said before, the theme is that I'm hearing that we really just need to be mindful of making these schedules as individualized and unique and specific to our kids as possible. And that may or may not be the easiest thing in the world to do, considering, parents working from home and synchronous learning schedules and all of these different things. But I think it also comes back to working with, your DEP, right? Your nurse practitioner at your neuromuscular center, to make sure that those relationships are in place so that you have people behind you helping you advocate for what your child needs. So I can't recommend that enough. I think this will be our last question, and I'm going to start with Molly, and then we can toss it around from there. But I am really optimistic to think that this pandemic will not last forever. And so I have this cautious optimism that at some point everybody's going to go back to school in person and life is going to get back to normal. But I know that that's also a huge transition to think about, right? So we get used to this new groove of virtual learning and what this looks like. What do you think about preparing for that adjustment when the time comes? And what would be some last words that you would send our parents off with today as we think towards the future and what it might look like?
Oh my goodness, that is, I actually love the optimism that comes with the question that we will someday be out of this situation.
Molly, I have to. I
think we all do, and I think that's where it comes down to hope, which is that we will get to the end of this, and we're going to do it by taking one day at a time. But I think, what I've been sort of saying throughout is that I think I'm hoping, again, to find some silver linings in this experience. And that I do think that for some of our kids, especially those who experience social anxiety or who really need more assistive technology, this is kind of an opportunity also for there to be some tailored learning. And you may find that, it doesn't work unless your child starts school at 10 a.m. versus 8 a.m. And so there is an opportunity here to kind of figure out what might work for your child, and that it may alleviate some of the stressors when we do actually transition back to whatever real life looks like on the other side of this. Where things are a little bit more individualized and tailored. I mean, I certainly feel that way about parenting and working from home, and all of those kinds of things may look very different on the other side of this. So I think I can anticipate that we may have an opportunity here to learn more about our children and how they learn best, and that we can carry that over when we get to the other side of this. But I think the major thing right now is to also remember that we are on a marathon and not on a sprint. And so it's super important to continue to prioritize the health and well-being of the children and the families as we go through this. And to remember, that it is time limited. So if, the worst case scenario is that this is not the best year of school, hopefully it's only going to be a year, and then we are going to get back to sort of a place where people will feel more supported. And the goal right now is to keep everybody as safe and healthy as we can.
Man, oh man, here's to hoping, right? Deb, do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to leave us with today?
I think that I want to end with that, communication is key, and, we're all learning through this, and, don't wait until you're pulling your hair out before you reach out to, the school or your neuromuscular team or, whatever you rely on for your support, because we're all in this together. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but like you, I remain very hopeful that this is not going to last forever, and we will come through on the other side, and that I hope that, we're learning some things that might make more sense with regards to education and helping our patients with challenges.
Absolutely. This is definitely some forced creativity, forced innovation that hopefully brings some lasting positive change on the other side of this. And then, Alex, do you have anything else that you would like to add in to wrap us up with? I'd love to hear any final thoughts that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think I'm also very hopeful, but I think that this is a very unique opportunity for all of us to really get to know each other, and for parents to get to know their kids. I've seen a huge improvement in a lot of my kiddos' treatment plans because they're at home with their parents, and their parents are there listening to their needs, and we're creating an open environment for these kids and these parents to ask questions and to reach out. I've made myself a lot more available, and I know that a lot of other therapists have as well, and so don't be afraid to reach out to your children's therapist. We are here for you guys, and we will answer any questions that you have any time of the day. And like I said, it's a beautiful opportunity to get to know our kids and what they need. And then when we do go back to school, we are going to know a little bit better about what they're like in school and what their needs are going to be and how to communicate those across a little bit better. So I think it's a very unfortunate situation, but I think that there are some positive things that are coming from this as well.
Absolutely. We are all in this together. So the last piece that I will share with everybody on the line, let's keep the conversation going. I think that this has all been incredibly helpful. Molly, Alex, and Deb have had wonderful insight and recommendations for us. But let's take it one step further. Join us on Friday at noon Eastern on our Facebook page. We're going to have a Family Friday episode with conversation about navigating virtual IEPs, 504s, other learning accommodations. We will have experts in learning accommodations. We'll have some Duchenne parents, some teachers, and I think it'll be a really helpful opportunity to kind of dig in a little bit deeper for what this really means for our families and for our children. So we hope to see you there. This is all available on our coronavirus website, on our PPMD website. So feel free to circle back and re-listen or check out some of our other resources that we have available. And thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you to our speakers, and thanks for everybody that called in. We're really grateful to have the opportunity to have this dialogue, and we hope that you found it helpful. So with that, we'll go ahead and conclude this recording. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.